Oh, we're live! We're back! It's another fantastic episode of How Do You Solve a Problem with Maria and Snow Dyke. Gareth, we're here, and in this episode, we're going to be talking about peer review and the problems that researchers and editors face when dealing with peer review comments. Maria, this one is particularly close to your heart. Why don't you tell our fantastic audience about your background, what you do every day?
Yes. So I do reviews, a lot of reviews. I write reviews of papers on the content of papers before they are submitted to journals. And then, and because I do that, I give authors a chance to correct some of them, some of the issues that I find before the mean reviewers get a hold of them. So it's kind of a failsafe, if you will. It's something that I enjoy doing because I get to read new science and I get to read new research and be involved in whatever's coming up next.
Maria's being very modest. What she actually does in her day-to-day work is help researchers anticipate the kinds of comments that they might receive in peer review and help them improve their papers so that when they go into peer review, they have a better chance of acceptance. Right, Maria? But what happens at journals and what we've done to start this event, because in a minute we're going to talk about how to deal with negative comments, how to deal with the kinds of comments that peer reviewers often send back to journals, and in particular what we like to call the 7 dwarfs of peer review, which is why we titled this LinkedIn Live in the way that we did. Editors deal with peer reviewers every day. Reviewers get comments back from peer reviewers every day, but who's who in the journal editorial office? So let's start with our handy field guide for academic publishing. Maria?
So, several people will edit your manuscript. First of all, you will write and you will edit. So, you as an author will also edit your own work. Then you have the academic editor that controls the content of a journal, that knows a lot about what you're doing, that you usually ask people to ask reviewers to and know other people within the subject area that are able to review the paper. You have a language editor that is more to do with editing the English formatting and figuring out how best to present tables and figures and make sure that everything is up to scratch. And the journal managing editor, which is basically someone who knows how the editorial pace of a journal needs to go. So if you want to publish more on a certain subject, if a method is currently being used a lot, it's an overview pertaining to that journal, not just the field of expertise.
This is important because some of the key questions that we get from researchers relate to the use of this word editor in English, like who's who in the publishing process. So we thought we'd start with that as the beginning of this event. By the way, if you're listening to us live on LinkedIn, you can put your comments into the LinkedIn feed. You can also comment on the post later if you're listening to this in the future. Hello, future Gareth. Hello, future Maria. You can do that as well. So editors select peer reviewers, don't they, Maria, in a number of different ways. And these are important ways to think about the process, because when you send a paper into a journal, you might not be thinking about this.
Yes. So the first most important thing is not to do with how the reviewer will actually review your paper. It's to do with how they relate to you as an author. Is that there needs to be no conflict of interest between yourself, your work, and the peer reviewer being selected. So that means that if you have participated, if you have collaborated with this researcher before, and in the proximal future, so in the proximal past, so in the last 2 years, it is a conflict of interest if they're going to review your paper, because you've probably spoken to them about it. You've probably discussed the work at some stage. So this is the first very important thing. It's to do with ethics and integrity in publishing. The second thing is whether or not the reviewer is available to conduct the review and is able and has the time and wants to do that. Because once again, this is an unpaid work, so they may not be able to do the work for the journal, for the editor. The third is whether they know enough about the subject, whether they've published in it, within the subject or in subjects adjacent to it, if they are likely to do a good job of the review. And then the fourth is previous turnaround times. So if a reviewer is consistently late, they'll be less likely to be asked to perform another review. And if the reviews that they provided in the past are not good, they're less likely to be asked to perform the reviews as well.
Very important. And this is a quick look inside one of the main journal submission systems. This is a quick look inside the fantastic Scholar One. It's an interface from about 1992. You'd be quite shocked to hear that editors are still using these kinds of interfaces as a researcher, but this is how your editor is engaging with your paper and selecting peer reviewers. Let's have a quick look at more details. I might be going in and selecting reviewers. It's powered by Web of Science in this particular case, maybe not so much anymore. I think that's changing, but I'm basically going in there as an editor using a range of different tools within Scholar One, within things like the Web of Science Reviewer Locator, to find suitable reviewers, keeping in mind that me as an editor, I might not be a subject area specialist. So with that in mind, don't forget to suggest peer reviewers in your cover letter so that the editor can use them if she or he wants, if that's allowed by the journal, by the publisher. But these are the kinds of screens that editors get to see on a daily basis. And coming up in front of them will be suggestions for people that they might like to invite. And often, as Maria will attest, they invite people who might not be particularly appropriate for particular journals. They might invite people who are not particularly happy to even be asked as a reviewer. Finding reviewers is a big problem for publishers. It's a huge problem. And so that's why we would like to spend the rest of the time in our LinkedIn Live event today talking about those pesky 7 dwarfs, because it's not always the case that the comments that you get back as an editor or as an author are happy and sunshiny and full of little forest animals giving your paper a fantastic review, right, Maria?
No, more often than not, they're really not. But there are ways in which you can deal with them. So let's talk about that now.
We're going to talk about that. Yeah, we're going to talk about that because it's important for researchers to be aware of this, because there really are lots of different kinds of reviews that come back. And the first one is cursory. Maria.
It's whenever someone tells you, "Oh, this is great. Please publish as it is," or they tell you, "Oh no, this is rubbish. I don't want to see this ever again." This is not helpful. This doesn't tell you anything. As an author or as an editor, you can't really pass this along to an author because there's nothing constructive and there's no suggestion of what you can do to improve there.
So editors will select peer reviewers. That's a big problem for journals and publishers, finding researchers who are willing to put the time in, often almost always unpaid, without any recognition really, so that they'll do the peer review. But this is the kind of information that might often come back to the editor. Cursory, I'm not getting enough information from the peer review. It's just great. Please publish as is. And I will admit to having sent in peer reviews like this in my academic career. It's a great paper. You should just publish it as is. How about this one? You see this one a lot, I know, Maria, in your line of work. Aggressive peer reviewers.
Yes, so they don't like the research. They have personal issues sometimes with the authors. So they may be direct competitors and they dislike very much what they're reading. And sometimes because they haven't been the ones authoring it. So they just say, no, it's not good enough. I would have done it differently. And probably they would, but that's not reason enough to um, pass this along unchecked to the authors, because once again, it doesn't tell you, it's not helpful, it doesn't tell you how it could improve.
Editors are gatekeepers of incoming peer review comments, and their job, our job, is to shield authors, or at least we should be shielding authors from many of these kinds of comments. And I've seen this a lot when a peer reviewer thinks, I would have done the study differently, or that's a great idea, I wish I'd thought of doing that particular study. And so rather than be constructive or congratulate the authors on a great piece of work, they get all angry. They hate the paper and they try to see it not published. So cursory, not enough information in the review. Aggressive, that's dwarf number 2. What about this one? And I think this one's quite valuable, right, Maria?
This is what you want. This is a thoughtful reviewer that has thought about the paper, that provides in-depth comments, that provides constructive comments, and enables the actual author to improve their work. And even more, it tells the editor a lot about whether the subject is of interest and what's the priority to being published that the paper should attain.
So if you're an editor listening to this, and I know that some of our audience at SciTrain are in fact journal editors, some of the colleagues listening to this event now or in the future, hello future Maria, might be thinking this is the best kind of peer review that I could receive as an editor. The comments are thoughtful, they're in-depth, they're providing constructive comments to help authors improve. It's not always, as we're talking about, what you get. Really, a relatively small proportion of reviews that come in really do fulfill this particular box. I love this one. I've done this as well, definitely in my research career. Jealous peer review.
Yes, so it's whenever the reviewer feels that because their comments were so constructive, that they've made such a significant contribution, that their name should be added to the study before publication, that they should be included as an author. That's not appropriate, because even though one of the authorship criteria is that you make a significant intellectual contribution to the work, if you are just contributing in the writing stage, or if you are telling authors as a reviewer that to be published you would need to do some more experiments, you are in a position of power, you're in a privileged position. So you shouldn't be capitalizing on that and demanding that you be included as an author, because it's part of your work as an academic that you should do these peer reviews. It's good for you, it's good to help you think, and it's good to help you improve your own future work.
Ethics of peer review, ethics of performing peer review. If you get asked by a journal to review a paper and you feel that you've done so much work that you need to be included as an author, well, number one, that's not ethical in the first place. But if you do think so, get in touch with the editor, talk to the editor rather than communicating that directly to the authors. That's a flagrant breach of the ethics of peer review. I used to know a guy, let's call him Dave. He published maybe 20, 25 papers a year. And we'd be like, Dave, how come you publish so many papers? And he'd be like, well, every time I do a substantial peer review, I usually write to the authors directly, like bypassing the journal, and ask them, I've done so much work on this. Don't you want to add me as an author? And usually they'd say yes, which I think is terrible. But that was part of his kind of modus operandi. What do you think of that, Maria?
That's not nice. That is a huge breach, because that is also quite predatory, because you're in a position of power to the authors. The authors want to get their paper published, and you are being the gatekeeper. You are providing work, you're providing input, but then you're also saying that I would help you get this published if you add my name. That is really nasty.
So if you're an author, if you're a researcher listening to this and that's happened to you, or that ever does happen to you in the future, what should you do, Maria? What should you do if a peer reviewer writes directly to you, the author, and says, well, I mean, I think I've done way too much work. I think you should include me. Or, as also very often happens, what about citing a number of my papers in your article, and then I'll give you a more favorable review?
Um, so, if that happens, first of all, contact the editor. As an author, you should contact the editor and make them aware of what is going on. Also, you should only ever cite papers that are appropriate and adequate and relevant. If you're citing papers from an author just because they're a reviewer and they're asking you to cite papers that are only marginally relevant or not relevant at all, you don't have to cite them. And you should explain that whenever you write your rebuttal to the editor, that you haven't cited the papers that reviewer 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 has asked because they were not relevant.
It's the editor's job to police this. It's the editor's job to be the gatekeeper of this process. But as we all know, like, often editors are not paying close enough attention to what's happening with these peer reviews. They're not really aware of what's going on behind the scenes, as reviewers might be contacting directly to authors, as was happening in the case of my colleague Dave that I talked about a moment ago. So do get in touch with your editor. You may not be aware of your rights as an author if this kind of thing is happening to you. So quick recap: cursory, aggressive, thoughtful, jealous. We're on to kind of peer reviewer number 5. And this really is the most biggest, horriblest nightmare for editors. I can attest to that from my own career as an academic editor. Late peer review, Maria.
This is really annoying because you're stuck. You're stuck with this reviewer because they say they're quite friendly. They will reply. They will keep you in the loop. They say they're doing the review right now. They will get back to you as soon as possible. And then months pass and you hear nothing back from them. And then whenever you email them back, reminding them your review was due 2 months ago, they're just saying, "Oh, I'm sorry. It's really, I am doing this right now." And then another 3 months passed. Uh, and you're stuck because you cannot just pull the work from them and give it to somebody else because they haven't been able to tell you that they can't do this, they're not available, they don't have the time. It's best, it's always best, if you don't have the time, if you're not available, just convey that to the editor as soon as you possibly can.
Yeah, rules for accepting a peer review as a researcher. Is this your field? Do you have the expertise? And do you have the time to do a good job? 2 key rules when you get an invitation to do a peer review as a researcher. Is this really within your field of expertise? Can you do a good job reviewing this paper? And do you have the time? I really get this a lot, and I'm also guilty of this myself, agreeing to do lots of things and then never actually doing them. I have some other friends, shout out to Adam. He will tell you, I don't have time to do this. Find somebody else. And I really respect that. It's a great habit to get into. If you don't have the time to do something in a timely manner, tell the editor, because otherwise, as Maria had just been saying, they'll be waiting for you to get the review back in, and they can't pull it from you without risking offending you, which is another important part of the editorial workload, editorial responsibility. And what about this one? This is also quite fun. I've got some great stories in relation to this. Angry peer reviewers.
Really, really nasty. They've been asked to look at papers and are then passed over in the journal process, probably because they've taken too long, they were late, or they returned comments that were not good enough. But then they get angry at the reviewers and they say, "But I've contributed, I've done that, I want recognition for my work." Uh, yeah, but maybe it's not timely enough, it's not good enough. So yeah, this is one of the reasons why I think it's so important to have standards for peer reviewers, and to have peer reviewers adhere to some form of um, reply, some form of form where you can just fill in answers to the questions.
So what's the best place to go if people want to get some information on standards in peer review? Where should people listening to this LinkedIn Live event go if they want to get information about standards, standardizing peer review?
So
I thought it was the case that almost every journal and almost every publisher had different standards for peer review.
they have a lot of divergent information, but they all pretty much abide by the same principles, which are very simple requests, and they are the ones that we're telling you here right now. And also, if you go through um, our project on peer review resources, if you go through the several courses that SciTrain has on peer review, you can learn more about standardized peer review resources and how you could do a good job, because it is quite fulfilling as an academic. If you do a number of peer reviews, you get known by journal editors, and you're more likely to then be invited to write papers, write reviews, um, because you've read so much on the subject and you are aware of the trends.
I would say two things from a researcher perspective, from my own background as a researcher. I was completely unaware until I started working in publishing how peer review is managed at journals, number one. Many of the email communications that you're going to get from editors are automated, right? So, and that's the first thing. The second thing is that editors also have to manage their relationship with peer reviewers and their journal's relationship with peer reviewers. I've definitely been in the position several times where I've had to write to a reviewer who's taking so long to come back with review comments. Then they get angry with me for hassling them. I got a comment once, I remember, is like, well, if you want me to do it quicker, the author should have just written a better paper, is what the guy said.
Well, no. Then you just say, I don't think I can do that. Could you please find somebody else?
Oh, but once they're in the system and they've been invited, often researchers feel that that's, a status thing, that they've been invited to review for this journal or that journal, and they kind of cling on to that in many cases, and they don't appreciate it being deselected or being told by the journal that we no longer require your input. I've definitely experienced that as well. But what about this one? This one's also very interesting. Papers that you just can't find any peer reviewers for. I always used to have 2 or 3 papers each month where I'd invite 20 people, 30 people, and nobody would accept to review.
Yes, those are the dinosaurs. And they may be because of the subject that is so niche that there's not a lot of people that feel they have the expertise, or it's so interdisciplinary that there may be some people that feel they don't know enough about everything in the paper to be able to do a good job. First of all, you don't have to know everything about what there is in the paper. That's why there's more than one reviewer per paper. So you can, if you accept one of these, you can say that I will be reviewing only the content pertaining to biology or mathematics or physics or history. And it could also be because of the authors. If the authors are known to the reviewers, they may be so junior that you feel like they haven't done a good enough job, or they may be so senior that you don't want to annoy them or piss them off by providing comments that they won't enjoy. So those are the weird ones, and we'll need to tread carefully depending on the type of peer review that you're employing for the journal or the publication. It may be a case of trying different things.
Very important. And there was a very interesting COPE, Committee on Publication Ethics case study, I remember from a few years ago. Can a journal reject a paper just because they can't find any suitable peer reviewers? That's really interesting. Can I write to an author and say, sorry, Maria, I couldn't find any reviewers for your paper, therefore I'm going to reject the paper? Comments in the LinkedIn feed, please, everybody. This is a live event, or maybe you're listening to this in the future. Hello again, future Gareth. Above all, when communicating with editors and peer reviewers as an author, but also as a peer reviewer and an editor, what do we have to remember to do, Maria?
To always be polite. Just communicate with politeness. It's good for everyone involved. It reduces stress. Refrain from personal attacks. Provide constructive criticism. And remember that these are your colleagues and you will likely be reviewed by them next. So
Absolutely.
these positions are not fixed in stone. They are recyclable, and you will be in a different one next week.
Absolutely, absolutely. Most research fields are quite small, quite niche. Good use of the word niche there, like it. It's important then, always be positive, always try to help people to improve their papers. And we've put together a few quick tips for you here. We won't read them all out, but you can definitely have a look at these slides in your own time a little bit later. When you respond to peer review comments as an author, and they could be from any of our 7 dwarfs of peer review, what nuggets of knowledge would you give to our listening researchers, Maria, when responding to peer review comments?
Always be comprehensive. Show the editor, who will be the first person reading your rebuttal, that you've taken the comments seriously, and address them one by one. Have all the materials you need ready to resubmit, and keep going. Don't be discouraged by a not so good response first time around.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's important always to stay positive, always to be polite in the whole process. And so with that in mind, what we've done as well is put together a few good and bad examples of how to talk to editors as researchers, as reviewers. Thank you for your interest on the topic. The reviewer has correctly pointed this out. We concur. Thank you for your valuable comments, Maria. This valuable insight is much appreciated. Your comments have significantly improved the quality of the work. Being positive in the way that you respond to peer review also increases your article's chances of acceptance.
Completely. And a thing that it's really important to point out is that whenever you're writing a rebuttal to the reviewer's comments, you're not actually reviewing the reviewer's comments. So don't go back and review the comments from the reviewers saying that I don't agree or whatever it is. You may not agree. You say that to the editor, that it is probably unnecessary, but we will attempt, is always a good idea. Also, if it's not completely, if it hinders publication, or if it's hindering the time spent within the peer review process, just address that to the editor as well. If you say that it's taking too long, just call the editor, email them, contact them. They will likely be able to tell you something.
I would say 2 things. Always wait before responding to anybody, emails, peer review comments, because what you get back from a journal might feel terrible when you get it back. But I guarantee that after a few days, it won't feel so bad. You'll be easily able to address most of those negative, nasty, jealous, aggressive, cursory, late peer review comments. That's also really important. Also, being polite, doing it in a constructive way. And so with this event, and we do these every 2 weeks, I bet you can't wait for the next one. It's our How Do You Solve a Problem with Maria and Gareth series of events. We've loved having you here today. Do check out scitrain.com if you'd like peer reviewer training for your researchers, engagement events if you're listening to this as a publisher or journal editor, you'd like to attract loads of researchers to your journals. Maria, any final comments? Thank you again for joining us today.
Any final comments? If you do know of any resources that are there on peer review training, do let us know. Have some of these in the comments, and we will get back to you because we are attempting to gather them all together.
How do you solve a problem with Maria and Gareth? We'll be back soon. Have a great weekend.